This hearing of the Subcommittee on Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research titled Increasing Resiliency, Mitigating Risk, Examining the Research and Extension Needs of Producers will come to order. I want to thank you all for being with us this morning as we examine the research and extension needs for producers. Looking back on the past year, we've seen intense flooding in the Midwest, hurricanes in the Southeast, and wildfires out west. Just this week, USDA released a crop progress report detailing that 60% of soybeans have been planted in surveyed states compared to 88% historical planting average. As we speak, flooding is keeping farmers out of the field. These disasters, driven by an increasingly variable climate, pose serious threats to the domestic agricultural industry and the rural communities depending on this sector. Unfortunately, I've seen this firsthand in the Virgin Islands. In 2015, the territory suffered a serious drought. In 2017, we were hit by 2 major hurricanes. Now, once again, back in drought. Recovery continues to be an ongoing process. My farmers and ranchers need tools that not only help them survive, but thrive in the face of a changing climate. These examples show that farmers and ranchers throughout the country are constantly forced to deal with variables that are outside their control. To remain economically viable and to protect already slim margins, producers seek to create resilient operations by mitigating risk when possible. Advancements in technology and management practices are made possible by robust agriculture research efforts, a topic that is squarely within the jurisdiction of this subcommittee. This committee recognizes the value of investment in public research. In the 2018 Farm Bill, our committee supported increased funding for programs like the Specialty Crop Research Initiative and the Organic Agricultural Research and Extension Initiative. I strongly supported these increased investments, but we cannot become complacent. As detailed in a report by the Economic Research Service, the Chinese government increased spending on agricultural research nearly 8-fold, between 1990 and 2013. Their spending our public agricultural research surpasses ours in 2008. 10 years later, we continue to fall behind. If we want our agricultural sector to remain competitive, particularly when operating in an increasingly variable climate, we must bolster the resources available to producers. According to the 2017 Census of Agriculture, there are over 396 million acres farmed in the United States. That's a great number. The farmers and ranchers tending these acres are on the front lines of a changing climate. As we seek to develop mitigation and adaptation strategies aimed at combating climate change, farmers and agricultural researchers must have a seat at the table. Their understanding of working the land is vital, and their voices must be heard. Farmers and ranchers are an integral partner in the fight against climate change. To show that farmers have always been climate-focused, I have here, if you can believe this, a 1941 yearbook of agriculture from the USDA. It's titled Climate and Man. One line from the foreword that still rings true today is this: the first step in increasing knowledge is to have a healthy awareness of what we do not know. Though farmers have always been acutely aware of climate, their ability to respond to shifts in the climate are changing. That's why we're here today, to hear directly from the stakeholder community on the research and extension needs of farmers as they seek to increase resiliency and mitigate risk. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I thank them for taking time out of their schedules to engage with us in this critically important topic. I would like to thank the witnesses for being here today and look forward to receiving their testimony. I now yield to the distinguished ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Farmers and ranchers are some of the most resilient people that I know, and thanks to our agricultural research and extension system, they are at the forefront of innovation and productivity. As we look forward, there are always new threats developing, and producers are going to need new tools in order to adapt to changing conditions. Congress recognized the need for research all the way back in 1862 with the passage of the Morrill Act, which created the land-grant university system. Since then, Congress has provided additional investments in American agricultural research and extension, most recently with the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. The livelihoods of farmers, ranchers, foresters, and consumers continues to depend on innovation, and today's challenges are no different than the past. In the past 2 years, Florida's producers and foresters saw devastating losses from hurricanes, and the citrus industry has been nearly wiped out by citrus greening disease. We are seeing more subtle, yet perhaps even more consequential threats developing, including aggressive pest and disease pressures, which will undoubtedly have an impact on food production and availability. Climate policies like the Green New Deal have consumed the headlines from Congress, often blaming the agricultural sector as the problem. I could not disagree more. I wholeheartedly believe that innovation in American agriculture is part of the solution. We know that the U.S. agriculture uses a tiny percentage of the energy consumed in the U.S., but the changes proposed in the Green New Deal would have significant implications for the ability of U.S. agriculture to continue to meet the demand for fresh, safe, and affordable food, both in the U.S. and abroad. In contrast, Congress chose a better solution, passing the 2018 Farm Bill, which is arguably the greenest farm bill ever. In addition to significant investment in research, the Farm Bill programs protect farm and forest lands and assist producers in voluntary practices that sequester carbon, reduce pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. They preserve farmland and they improve the energy efficiency of farming practices, all while providing America with abundant and affordable food and fiber. I would like to applaud President Trump for his leadership on this important issue with the signing of yesterday's Agricultural Biotechnology Executive Order. This administration is now on a path to eliminating unnecessary regulatory hurdles while creating opportunity for additional investment in some of the innovative tools we are going to discuss here today. I look forward to watching the Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration follow the USDA's lead. I would like to thank each of the witnesses for taking time to have this important dialogue with us, and I look forward to a productive discussion. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. I would note for the record the chair of our full committee, Mr. Colin Peterson, who is here with us. Thank you for your presence in this subcommittee hearing. Would request that any other members submit their opening statements for the record so that the witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses and thank you for being with us here today. At this time, I'll introduce our first witness, Dr. David Wolfe. Excuse me, Dr. Wolfe is a professor of plant and soil ecology at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Thank you for being with us. The second witness is my own constituent, Dr. Robert Godfrey. Dr. Godfrey is the director of the Agricultural Experiment Station at the University of the Virgin Islands, where he is primarily on the St. Croix campus. Thank you so much for being with us. The third witness, I will hear from Ms. Breeze Tenser, who will be introduced by Congressman Panetta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity, Ranking Member Dunn, and Mr. Chairman, of course. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a real pleasure to introduce one of my good friends and a staunch, and we are so fortunate to have her as an advocate, Miss Breeze Tenser, the Executive Director of the Organic Farming Research Foundation, located in Santa Cruz, California, on the Central Coast. Breeze brings 20 years of leadership experience on organic food policy, farming, and research issues to OFRF. She has been a strong, dependable resource and advocate for the organic producers in my district. And let me tell you, historically, as many of you know, especially Breeze, that's a district that's been dominated by conventional farming. However, because Breeze has spoken up, has spoken out, and continues to speak for our organic industry and our organic farmers, her voice is heard across this country, and that's why organic farming and what the benefits it does for our farmers across this country is heard loud and clear. So let me just take this time to introduce to you Breeze, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I yield back.
I'll
Thank you.
turn to Congresswoman Schreier to introduce our fourth witness, Mr. Sam Godwin.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I am so pleased to welcome Mr. Sam Godwin to testify this morning. He operates a family organic farm of 300 acres growing apples, pears, and cherries, true Washingtonian, with his wife, Gwyn, and oldest daughter in Tonasket, Washington. Mr. Godwin received his undergraduate degree from Washington State University and then master's from Seattle U. Prior to his career in agriculture, he worked at the Boeing Company. He currently serves on the Washington State Tree Fruit Association's Board of Directors. I am excited to hear from you this morning and hear your thoughts about how low and no-till farming, regenerative farming, crop rotation, and carbon sequestration can really show us that farmers could literally save our planet. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd also welcome Dr. Fred Gumeter. Is that correct, Way?
Yes.
Okay. And he'll be introduced by the ranking member, Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chairman Peterson. It's my honor to introduce a fellow Floridian, Dr. Fred Gumeter. He's a professor of citrus genetics at the University of Florida Citrus Research and Education Center in Lake Alfred, Florida. And he's currently doing great work to help producers find solutions to the devastating citrus greening disease. He is truly one of the world's most preeminent experts in this field, and I'm honored to introduce him to you today. Dr. Gumeter, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to hearing the testimony. You'll each of our witnesses will have 5 minutes. So you're aware, you're going to see the numbers right there in front of you. They're at 5. When 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow. And unlike my driving, that does not mean speed up. That means that you have 1 minute left. And when it's red, that means the time is up. The 5 minutes are up. Dr. Wolfe, will you please begin when you're ready?
Thank you. Well, I would like to start by thanking Chair Stacy Plaskett, Ranking Member Neil Dunn, and members of the subcommittee for holding this important hearing. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you my views on research and extension needs in this time of increasing climate variability and weather extremes. My perspective has been shaped by more than 3 decades at Cornell University with a program focused on soil and water management and climate change adaptation and mitigation. In addition to extension and academic research papers, I've also co-authored numerous regional and national climate assessments. I currently am lead project director for the New York Soil Health Program, and I serve on various advisory boards relevant to today's meeting, and I teach a course on climate change and food security. So with my few minutes, I want to just highlight 3 major points that are gone over in more detail in my written testimony. First, climate change impacts are turning out to be more complex and in some cases more severe than we imagined 30 years ago. One example of a climate change surprise has been an increased risk of cold damage for woody perennials such as apples and grapes in a warming world. This can occur when warmer and more variable late winter temperatures trigger an unusually early bloom that leaves the plants vulnerable to an extended period of frost risk. This problem has been particularly acute in my region, the Northeast, where in 2012 and again 2016, apple, grape, and other fruit crop growers lost millions of dollars due to this lack of synchrony between bloom and spring frost. Now, another area, climate models have projected for years an increase in both drought and flooding risk for many regions, but the severity of recent flooding impacts has left many areas unprepared. As we meet here today, and as we all know, many farmers in the Midwest are suffering from a record-breaking spring flooding that has delayed planting to the point where, for some, the season will be a total loss. This is what concerns farmers the most, extreme weather events that are more frequent and more catastrophic than previous generations have had to face. While not as severe, many farmers in the Northeast have also had delays in planting and flooding damage this spring and in the past 2 years. But if we go back to 2016, a record-breaking drought revealed unique vulnerabilities of this historically humid region, where we lack the infrastructure to deliver water in a summer with low rainfall. Okay, my second point is just that farmers are already responding, already adapting, as they can no longer rely on historical climate norms for their region to determine what crop to plant, when to plant it, or how to grow it. Business as usual is not a winning strategy today, and farmers are making changes accordingly. I'll mention just a few here briefly. Diversification is one widely adopted and often effective approach to hedge bets in an uncertain climate. This might involve staggered planting dates, more diverse cropping mixes, or other strategies. Improving soil health has become a popular win-win-win approach that can reduce input costs for the grower, build resilience to drought and flooding, and also sequester carbon in soils. Farmers are more tuned in today to their integrated pest management specialists, who can help them to anticipate and control a much more intense pressure from insect pests, diseases, and weeds. And finally, one other adaptation is for some farmers an investment in larger scale farm equipment to cover more acreage more quickly is a strategy for adapting to smaller windows of opportunity for farm operations, for example, getting in between heavy rainfall events. Finally, and most importantly perhaps, and more specific to our meeting today, for farmers to be successful, they will need support from those beyond the farm. And some key areas of need that I want to mention are, first, improved delivery of regional climate data to help farmers discern between, quote, normal bad weather and changes in weather patterns that truly warrant adaptation investments. Also, more research is needed to improve seasonal forecasts for longer range planning beyond just the 5-day forecast into things that might cover more of the growing season. Another one is we need all hands on deck to develop a digital agriculture approach that will take full advantage of satellite and other data sources, new sensor network technology, and computer systems to translate massive data into usable information for field-level management. This will require new collaborations in integrating knowledge from climate science, agronomy, engineering, and computer science. Regional centers for coordination, synergy, and accessibility of decision tools. Some land-grant universities, the regional USDA climate hubs, excuse me, and others have made a start here, but a more permanent and better funded solution is needed. Integrating conservation policy and programs with climate change adaptation and mitigation. This could warrant expansion of appropriations for soil and water conservation programs, such as those funded through the Farm Bill and implemented by the USDA and RCS. Disaster assistance, insurance policies, access to capital for adaptation. This is a big complex issue, but I think warranting review at this point in time to make sure our policies are relevant and adequate within the context of recurring weather-related disasters that have a link with climate change. The possibility of a parallel track providing incentives for adaptation deserves further study. And finally, breeding and biotechnology for climate resilient crops and livestock is important, more than just corn and beans, but also specialty crops. And finally, I see my time is up. I'd like to thank the committee again for holding this important hearing. With strategic investments in research and extension and policies that facilitate adaptive management, there is no doubt that our farmers will be better prepared than they are today to meet the challenges and take advantage of any opportunities that a changing climate may bring. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from my constituent, Robert Godfrey, who's on the front line of changing climate, assisting the farmers in the Virgin Islands through his work at the Extension Program. Doctor?
Good morning, Chairwoman Plaskett, Ranking Member Dunn, members of the subcommittee, and Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Dr. Robert Godfrey, and I'm the Director of the Agricultural Experiment Station at the University of the Virgin Islands. Our faculty and staff conduct research in the disciplines of agroforestry, agronomy, animal science, aquaculture, biotechnology, and horticulture. The Cooperative Extension Service provides outreach to the community in agricultural and natural resources, 4-H, family and consumer sciences, and communications, technology, and distance learning. Most of our research projects incorporate climate and the environment as a necessity due to our location. Currently, we have research projects evaluating micro-irrigation to enhance water use efficiency for crops, mulching systems and cover crops to minimize external inputs for soil improvement, evaluating adaptive traits of local livestock breeds such as Senepol cattle and St. Croix white hair sheep, and selecting and developing field crop varieties for enhanced production in the tropics. It is estimated that the U.S. Virgin Islands imports 90 to 95% of its food items, indicating that there's enormous potential market opportunity for local farmers to tap into. Farming in the U.S. Virgin Islands is characterized by small farms averaging less than 5 acres in size. Most agricultural production inputs are imported, and high shipping costs contribute to significantly to the costs of production and operation. Based upon USDA definitions, the majority of farmers in the U.S. Virgin Islands are limited resource and socially disadvantaged farmers. They face many constraints unique to small-scale tropical agriculture, such as seasonal rainfall, high incidence of pests and diseases, high organic matter turnover in the soils, high temperature and humidity, increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, and limited access to financing for farm support. In September 2017, two Category 5 hurricanes devastated the U.S. Virgin Islands 12 days apart, enhancing the level of destruction and hampering recovery efforts. After Hurricane Irma devastated St. Thomas and St. John, St. Croix farmers, AES, CES, the Virgin Islands Department of Agriculture, and several community groups collected and shipped relief supplies to our sister islands by commercial and private boats. Then St. Croix and Puerto Rico were hit by Hurricane Maria and suffered severe damage. The ports of St. Croix, St. Thomas, and Puerto Rico were all shut down, even just temporarily, at the same time, which limited access to relief and recovery resources. Many crops were lost due to wind damage and saltwater contamination. Livestock farmers suffered damage to fences, animal pens, and loss of animals from airborne debris. As an example, the university sheep research flock lost a third of its breeding ewes. The lack of locally available resources such as irrigation supplies, seedlings, fence wire, fence post, and animal feed made recovery efforts for all farmers difficult. In addition to hurricanes, there have also been periods of drought in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The average annual rainfall is 51 inches, but in 2015, we received less than 25 inches of rain. The Virgin Islands Department of Agriculture was able to offer imported feed and hay at reduced fees, but their ability to provide other services and water for farmers was very limited. The ability for livestock farmers to sell animals was hampered by the limited capacity of the one federally inspected abattoir on St. Croix. The abattoir on St. Thomas is still not operating after suffering damage during Hurricane Irma. The field research facilities of the Agriculture Experiment Station were severely damaged and limited our ability to conduct research for most of 2018. Our research programs are slowly coming back online, but we still have a long way to go. A proposal has been submitted by AES to the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program to develop an agricultural hazard mitigation and resiliency plan. It will coordinate with the territory-wide comprehensive hazard mitigation and resiliency plan managed by other units in the university. In response to stakeholder needs after the recent storms and drought, Cooperative Extension Service has offered training to help livestock producers rehabilitate their pastures, training for use of composting, micro-irrigation, and soil conservation, workshops on restoring trees damaged by the storms and droughts using proper pruning techniques, and AES and CES staff have joined an advisory committee that developed a plan for recycling the large amounts of vegetative and wood debris left by the hurricanes by making that mulch available for distribution to farmers and the community. In conclusion, I want to say that agriculture in the U.S. Virgin Islands will continue to be impacted by climate change through increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. These extreme events serve to highlight the importance of food security and accessibility in a remote island location such as ours. As the University of the Virgin Islands continues to support and develop agriculture in the U.S. Virgin Islands by working with our local stakeholders and regional and federal partners, the impact of climate change will play a significant role in the development of our resiliency, mitigation, and sustainability plans. I thank you for this opportunity to testify before this subcommittee, and I look forward to your questions.
The next witness, if you would. Ms. Tenser.
Thank you. Chairwoman Plaskett, Ranking Member Dunn, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your time and attention on this pressing issue. Farmers have always had to manage a variety of risks, and now with climate change disruptions exacerbating these risks, with weather extremes that are modifying the life cycle of crop pests and pathogens, delaying planting seasons, and accelerating soil degradation, farmers are facing new challenges that pose increased threats to both their livelihoods and their ability to produce food for a growing population. Organic producers utilize innovative strategies that support agricultural resiliency and show exciting potential to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, strong market demand and high prices for certified organic farm products can help reduce economic risks for producers. Since 1990, the Organic Farming Research Foundation has worked to foster both improvement and widespread adoption of organic farming systems across the United States. Our recent publication on risk and resiliency, based significantly on USDA-funded research, documents the importance of soil health, a guiding principle of organic systems, in reducing production cost and minimizing risk. Organic systems that maintain higher soil organic matter and biological activity, improve moisture infiltration and storage, and foster efficient nutrient cycling, result in greater yield stability through weather extremes and other stresses. Such soils sustain crops through dry spells, require less irrigation water, and undergo less ponding, runoff, and erosion during heavy rains. Organic practices such as cover cropping can enhance soil health, support management of weeds, pests, and diseases, and build overall resilience to stress while sequestering carbon and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. The importance of crop rotation and diversification in improving soil health, managing stresses, and reducing risk of catastrophic financial losses when one crop fails has been well documented in both conventional and organic systems. We believe that continued research investment is essential to realizing the full potential of organic farming strategies, and that such research can benefit all types of producers. Our last national survey of organic farmers and ranchers across the country provided robust insight into the research needs of the organic farming community. Based on input from nearly 2,000 certified organic operations, we can say with confidence that although research priorities vary by region, there are major commonalities in their desire for better information on soil health criteria, efficacy of amendments, weed, insect disease management, and development of regionally adapted cultivars equipped to withstand region-specific climate stresses. Our in-depth analysis of USDA organic research portfolio documents some exciting research and promising new strategies that merit further research and development into site-specific applications and practical guidelines for producers. Several USDA studies have clearly shown that organic systems can effectively sequester soil organic carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Further research investments can help maximize growers' ability to monitor soil organic carbon, measure the specific impacts of their practices. Research is also urgently needed to help all farmers reduce greenhouse gas emissions, especially nitrous oxide from fertilized or manured soils. We greatly appreciate the USDA funding for research, education, and extension that's crucial to helping build resiliency and address risk. The Sustainable Agriculture and Research and Education Program, the Organic Research and Extension Initiative, and the Organic Transitions Program have supported hundreds of studies that help both organic and conventional farmers address the threat of climate disruption. Thanks to these programs, farmers are using more efficient irrigation systems, adopting organic management practices that build healthy soil, sequester carbon, and limit application of fertilizers and pesticides. More research, education, and extension is needed to help farmers and ranchers implement the best practices for climate mitigation and adaptation for their locales and specific systems. In addition to the organic-specific programs, we encourage other USDA research agencies, including the Ag Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, to invest more in development and adoption of organic farming systems. Extension and education is essential to delivering new skills, tools, technology into the hands of growers. As a country, I believe we're underinvesting in cooperative extension programs, but organic producers are often at additional disadvantage because the organic expertise of organic extension agents varies significantly state by state. Farmers depend on the continued capacity of NIFA and ERS to maintain expertise in a centralized location. We believe that the centralized location is essential to helping effectively share key research findings with NRCS, Risk Management Agency, and other agencies so they can also support adaptation of best practices. These are challenging times for the people who grow our food. Thank you for your commitment and support of policies that help our nation's agricultural producers manage risk, increase resiliency, and provide food security to our population. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Godwin, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairwoman Plaskett and Ranking Member Dunn, for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee today. I am Sam Godwin. I operate a family organic farm of 300 acres with my wife and daughter. I also partner with my brother on another 85-acre orchard that was our father's farm. Growing up in center of orchard has many rewards, but the business-related issue that our industry is facing can be overwhelming at times. I'm here today to share some of my experiences from the farm to underscore the importance of research and extension for our future. Emerging or evolving threats come in many forms. For example, pests like brown marmorated stink bug and spotted wing Drosophila that were previously not present in our region now have become established in some areas because of changing weather patterns that prevent the larvae from being killed by sustained cold temperatures over the winter. Fire blight, which is a debilitating bacterium that infects pears and apple trees when spring weather is warmer or wetter than normal, has become an increasing challenging condition and an economic reality for growers. In 2018 alone, a sobering 88% of pear, 17% of apple acreage was impacted by fire blight in Washington state, resulting in an estimated $37 million loss. Changes in seasonal weather patterns are also forcing growers to pursue more tools to prevent sunburn in the orchards and needs to come up with an inventive solution to prevent heat-related storage disorders post-harvest. Our growers have long recognized the need to invest in pursuing solutions to these challenges and have assessed themselves on every box of tree fruit commercially sold since 1969 through the creation of the Washington Tree Fruit Research Commission. Since 2013, growers have also funded an additional $32 million tree fruit endowment at Washington State University. However, these investments by industry only take us so far. Federal research programs like ARS and SCRI are critical to leveraging grower resources to address the multitude of challenges that our growers and packers are facing on a daily basis. We appreciate the funding increase Congress has provided recently. We're especially pleased to see funding provided to create a new scientist position focusing on pear genetics and genomics, which will be housed down the road from my orchard in the Wenatchee ARS facility. Unfortunately, in spite of these funds being provided more than a year ago, due to the glacial pace of ARS hiring process, this position has yet to even be advertised. This is part of a much larger problem as hundreds of vacant scientists and support positions, many due to retirements, are remaining open at ARS for years. These positions have been funded by Congress. We would appreciate any help that members of this subcommittee can make to encourage ARS to eliminate this HR bottleneck and fill these much-needed positions. The SCRI has also provided great benefits to the specialty crop industry. A primary example is the Rose Breed program, which delivered breeding tools to accelerate the commercialization of tree fruit varieties and enhance disease-resistant and superior consumer attributes, in enhancing the resiliency for growers' operations by reducing production costs and increasing returns. Unfortunately, a drafting error in last year's Farm Bill removed the Secretary of Agriculture's authority to waive the 100% matching requirement for the SCRI. Because of the change in rules halfway through the budget cycle, scientists have had to withdraw several valuable projects from consideration. Request that you work with your Senate counterparts to fix this drafting error without delay so that these, as well as future valuable projects, are not lost. Research means nothing without a focused effort to get the information discovered into the hands of the growers. We encourage you to reinvigorate federal investment into extension activities through the Hatch Act and the Smith-Lever Act. Agriculture research is most successful with the investment and support of industry, federal government, and university extension systems. This success is modeled in Washington State, where ARS scientists work across the parking lot from the WSU scientists, who both utilize the Tree Fruit Research Commission and other commodity organizations for funding. Today, tree fruit growers find ourselves caught in a business that requires significant investment and long cycle improvements with customers and consumers who want short-term benefits. When you add on the additional risk created by new unknown cultivar, changing weather patterns, and new pests, we end up in a very high-stakes game that can drain your working capital in a single season. Federal investment in research is key to ensuring that we can continue to provide top-quality, American-grown apples, pears, and cherries to consumers. Once again, I'd like to thank the subcommittee for giving me the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Godwin. And Mr. Committer.
Good morning, Chairwoman Plaskett, Ranking Member Dunn, and members of the subcommittee. I am Fred Gmitter, a professor in horticultural sciences at the University of Florida, and I'm pleased to be here today to testify on behalf of the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. For more than 30 years, my major area of study and research has been the genetic code of citrus trees and fruit. I have no doubt that today, plant breeding is one of the most important and powerful tools at our disposal to combat global challenges in agriculture and food production. Over the years, I have seen a dramatic increase in our knowledge of plant biology and genetics that enable us to better understand what makes a plant do what it does in response to various environmental and man-made stressors. This information is what has enabled us to develop new innovative breeding tools like gene editing. It is these new tools that also will enable us to capitalize on the tremendous investment into the knowledge base we have already developed to improve plants in ways that were just a dream when I first began to work in this field. As temperatures rise, pests and disease evolve and spread, and natural resources become scarcer, we need to develop new varieties that are resilient to these emerging threats. In my state of Florida, the citrus industry has been devastated by citrus greening disease, and production has been dramatically decreased by 75% in less than 15 years. We are running out of time. Citrus growers need long-term sustainable solutions. There is no question that plant breeding innovation holds the key. Using gene editing, my team and others are working right now on developing citrus trees that are resistant, if not immune, to citrus greening disease. Innovation is enabling us to potentially do in just years what would previously only have been possible in decades or longer. And with the rapid spread of citrus greening disease in the U.S. and in the world, time is a luxury that we don't have. Scientists are now using gene editing technologies to precisely duplicate many naturally occurring mutations, but to do so in elite plant varieties and in a relatively rapid fashion. For example, to develop heat-tolerant lettuce that may be grown in the Central Valley of California, even with increasing temperatures. To develop potatoes that don't turn brown, to decrease food waste, which accounts for 7% of the annual global carbon footprint. To develop crop plants with deeper roots that can sequester carbon from the atmosphere and keep it deep in the soil after harvest. To develop rice that can be grown with saline irrigation water or even under dry conditions, just to name a few. However, for these and many more real-world benefits to be fully realized and widely adopted across breeding programs of all sizes and sectors, developers need clear science-based policy direction. I'm pleased that USDA in its new proposed rule on agriculture innovation policy recognize that applications of gene editing can result in plant varieties that are essentially equivalent to varieties developed through more traditional breeding. And in those cases, it only makes sense that they should be treated in the same way from a policy perspective. Historically, under the Coordinated Framework for Regulation of Biotechnology, USDA, FDA, and EPA have each served a specific function in ensuring the health of our food and the environment. We encourage the U.S. government to ensure alignment in risk-based policies around plant products of the newer breeding methods across these three federal agencies. And I appreciate the executive order announced just yesterday, which seeks to accomplish that. Any lack of consistency among the agencies will stifle research investments and activity and prohibit widespread access for public sector scientists to these evolving tools and the array of critical benefits they hold for society now and in the future. It's also important that the U.S. continues to take a leadership role in driving consistent plant breeding policies at the global level. We must continue moving forward in supporting research in plant breeding solutions to solve our collective global challenges. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions you have, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you all so much for your testimony on this very important topic. Now, members will be recognized for questioning in the order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. And with that, I will recognize myself for the first 5 minutes, and so, but just give me 1 second here. Is that my district, the 21st Congressional District of California, is ostensibly the top agricultural district in the top agricultural state. And like so many producers all across our country, the farmers and ranchers in my district are currently dealing with, 1, increased trade uncertainty, 2, a continuously shrinking labor pool, and giving those existing pressures, you put on top of that a changing climate or a natural disaster that's driven by climate change. You've seen that certainly in California, throughout the nation this year. And really, the question gets down to the producers and what effect do all of those pressures, particularly the climate change, are going to have on a producer's ability to remain profitable. And Mr. Godwin, I think you probably could speak directly to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can't control as farmers, and you appreciate those every day. Climate is one of them. But we do things, and we've learned to do things to help ourselves. For example, this year on our farm, we're installing our first 8 acres of nets covering a commercial crop. So we're doing that to control, the sun and the impact of sunburn on fruit, as well as to mitigate potential hailstorms. And in addition to that, we're adding side curtains to keep pests out of the crops. And we're working with our local university to actually do some beneficial insect release within the nets to see if we can control environment within the nets without pesticides, as an example, or any chemical for that means. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing. The unfortunate part is these types of things are very expensive, and there's not enough research right now to really validate, so that it takes a kind of a good faith effort and a jumping in and really being committed at this point, because it's a lot of money to cover an 8-acre field is a tremendous investment.
Very good. And certainly on the organic portion of it, side of it, Ms. Tanser, do you have any comments on that?
I would just echo that, thank you. I would just echo that there is a risk of new practices, and sometimes we see with new practices which are able to provide resiliency and ability for producers to adapt, there may be upfront cost, and sometimes those costs pay off economically for producers in their yield or stability, but sometimes those payoffs may not be seen for another 5 or even more years down the line. And so there's some real challenges with being able to make those long-term commitments to those practices. I would say the other thing that we've seen is that if you implement a single practice, whether that relates to your cover crop or your rotation or some of these additional techniques, as Mr. Godwin mentioned, you don't see the same success rate in terms of adaptation and risk management as you do with a portfolio of practices. And that, again, can be both complex and sometimes there's upfront costs. So we really support the research, education, and extension efforts to help producers be most efficient in choosing that suite of practices.
No, thank you. And Dr. Committer, I think you were talking about utilizing science to directly confront the challenges of climate change for some of these crops. And you could reiterate some of the techniques and things that you're doing.
The biggest focus of our work these days is citrus greening disease. And this, in some ways, is a consequence of the movement of pests and diseases that they carry into places where they didn't exist previously. And so this is a very important thing for us. I witnessed some hurricane damage 3 seasons ago on the Indian River area, the east coast of Florida, where some groves were underwater for 7 days. And we had a rootstock trial, trying different kinds of rootstocks that happened to be planted in one of these places. And as we went back a month, 2 months, and a year afterwards, we saw very clear genetic differences. Certain rootstocks survived the flooding for 7, almost 10 days in some locations, and others did not. And so these are the kinds of things that as a plant breeder, we look at the totality of the needs of the industry. And although we're primarily focused on citrus greening disease, we have to look at all of these other factors. And this is just one example of the kinds of things that we see and we're learning.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Wolfe, recently this committee just held a hearing expressing the valuable role public research plays in ensuring the ag community is well-equipped to address these challenges, pest and disease. And now we're talking about protecting operations against harm of climate change. And I guess the question is, how do we best share the information with farmers so they're best able to protect their livelihoods from these risks?
Yeah, there's as I mentioned in my initial comments, there's a real need for real permanence to hubs or centers where farmers can get that information reliably, and we can build the materials available for farmers in terms of resources, but also developing real-time decision tools that they might have as phone apps on their farm and that sort of thing. And do a lot of synergy working with farmers and with researchers to provide that sort of thing for them. And right now, a lot of land-grant universities, as well as the USDA, et cetera, have developed some of these, but there's a lack of permanence and real long-term funding for them. So a lot of work can go into developing a great source for farmers to get this information, great way of getting the communication back and forth, but they're dependent on soft funding, so that's a very important area. I want to mention one other thing. You mentioned labor, and I'm thinking of horticultural crops, fruit and vegetable crops. It's so labor intensive, as you know. A single farmer might have hundreds of people they have to hire. And climate change is interfering with the timing of planting and harvest. And so farmers are more challenged with the timing of when that labor force appears, et cetera. And it's a big challenge for our specialty crops.
Well, thank you so much. And with that, we'll recognize the ranking member from Florida, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. Dr. Goodbitter, can you discuss what role biotechnology may play in addressing citrus greening? You have begun to do that. You've touched on that. But I think we had the opportunity to speak before the meeting, and I'm not sure that people realize just how long this has been a problem for decades and decades around the world. And you have experience looking into all that. I wonder if you'd address that for a minute or two.
Yeah, citrus greening is a disease that's been known for more than 100 years. In Florida, we've been living with it for more than 15 years. Citrus breeding is a slow process. We're working with plants when we make crosses that take 5 to 7 years before they set their first crop of fruit to evaluate. So it's a very slow process. It's further complicated in the case of sweet orange and grapefruit, in that all of the sweet orange varieties that we know in the world all arose as mutations. That is to say, they weren't created by crossing things. They're mutations from some ancestral form. And the market is focused on orange juice or grapefruit, and grapefruit has the same story. So we can't very easily use conventional breeding to bring in changes to these crops. However, as we look at the range of genetic diversity that exists in citrus, and we find types that are more tolerant to this disease, we can understand the genetic control in those plants, look into the sweet orange plant genome itself, and find the same sorts of genes that we need to slightly change the spelling of the order of the nucleotides to make a plant go from something that's very sensitive to something that's tolerant and perhaps even resistant to the disease.
Outstanding. Also, I wonder if you could address some of the other pest and disease threats that affect us. I'm interested, obviously, in Florida, but let's don't be too parochial. If you have other areas and fruits that you're studying, I'd like to hear that.
Well, there are a number of citrus diseases that we've lived with for many years. Our growers these days would be very happy to go back to the days when those serious diseases were the only problems they had to deal with, because they would impact production to the 5 to 10%, 20% range, as opposed to something that's really knocked 75% of our production away. Citrus tristeza virus is an important disease. Citrus canker was a very important disease that the federal government spent millions of dollars attempting to eradicate. in an effort that failed ultimately because we had hurricanes that came and blew the disease all over the rest of the state of Florida. Citrus canker is a disease that can be more easily addressed by genetic approaches. There's a number. I mean, I could give you a seminar that would take a day long to go through all the disease problems
Unfortunately,
we
we
have.
only have 2 more minutes, sir. Just yesterday, President Trump signed an executive order to streamline the agricultural biotechnology regulations in an effort to harmonize the FDA, the Department of Agriculture, and the EPA. Can you elaborate a little bit on how important that is? You did mention in your testimony. I want to drive that point home.
Well, that's critical, and I think from my own perspective, it's especially critical for specialty crops, things such as apples, pears, and citrus, because you have a small army of public sector researchers, plant breeders, plant pathologists, who are working on these crops that don't get the attention of the large companies like Monsanto, Bayer, and so on. They're not particularly interested in those crops. And as we're looking at using some of the new breeding technologies in these plants, the question becomes, in my mind and many other researchers, well, if we are successful, are we actually going to be able to have an impact in these industries? They're smaller industries. As researchers, we're smaller guys as well. And we don't have $15 to $35 million to deregulate some particular modification that we've made. So it's very important for us that there's harmonization, and we would hope the harmonization would be on a science-based, risk-based analysis of what the technology is and what it can accomplish and what it means to our industries. Further, globally, we have to look to the federal government to work with us so that on a global basis, there's a more common understanding of the nature of what we're doing and what it means.
Well, I thank you very much for that, Dr. Gminer. I want to say I had a chance to review your biography before this hearing, and I was surprised and pleased to see that you actually hold the patents on more than 6 variety of citrus trees. I applaud your innovative and industrious career, and we certainly look forward to you and your colleagues saving our citrus industry. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Okay, thank you all. I had a couple of questions, and of course, Ms. Tenser, in your testimony, you note that research is only the first step. And you went on to say that farmers need continued education, training, and technical assistance. What methods are most effective at sharing scientific advancements with farmers and ranchers? And what messages resonate the best with producers related to resiliency and risk mitigation?
Thank you for the question. In our most recent survey of certified organic producers around the country, they stated that they're going to other farmers, and then their certifiers, and then their public universities third in terms of resources that they go to. But organic producers around the country would like to increasingly rely on the same sources of information, extension agents, NRCS personnel, even the risk management field staff, to better support and disseminate those research needs. We're really pleased to see progress in all of those areas. The new Farm Bill language supporting training of risk management agents in organic practices. NRCS is taking new initiatives to better train their staff in organic practices. But there's still work to do, and particularly with extension service. We think there's a lot of progress yet to be made, both in terms of overall investment and in making sure that we have expertise in every part of the country in organic systems, because it is inconsistent, and farmers get frustrated when they go to their extension agent and they can't help them with their organic suite of practices.
Well, moving to an extension agent, Dr. Godfrey, putting you on the spot here. What lessons have you learned with the drought, hurricane, and now drought again? What lessons do you think have been learned that can be applied broadly to how U.S. agriculture industry will respond to changing climate?
I think adaptation to the changing in climate is something that, especially in the Virgin Islands, our farmers are going to have to deal with probably on a little more frequency than other locations throughout the country. And some of the aspects of adapting to that can apply across the board, having resources in place for dealing with the after effects. That's been a big problem for us, primarily because of our location. We can't stockpile materials. We don't have a lot of local resources, as I mentioned in my testimony. Our food is imported, our support supplies and support materials are all imported, and it's difficult to have those things in place to help with immediate recovery. And some of that deals with access to finances to get these materials and supplies by farmers, whether it's through federal or local government-funded programs. There's issues with getting into those programs, getting those funds in place in a timely manner, and dealing with the aftermath. And when the devastation we received from the local hurricanes, those two back-to-back hurricanes really impacted our just local infrastructure, finding support for everything involved, agriculture, the community in general, our education system, hospitals, and everything. So there's a lot of things that we just don't have the capital and capacity to have these things in place that we need after the fact.
Well, I know that some of that is geographic, but
Yes.
how much would you say, and what are the specific ones that are related more to just being small-scale farming? Because you talked about farmers farming in less than 5 acres, as opposed to other places where potentially, organics may be pretty much smaller in scale than some of their partner, larger scale, more conventional farming. What are the particular issues that those small-scale farmers face that are throughout the country that are not resonating or are not the same with larger-scale farming?
Yes, small-scale farmers have the issue of any kind of disaster, whether it's drought, floods, hurricanes, freezing, whatever, can impact their whole crop. Whereas a large scale, they can absorb that. They have buffers because of their size. They can lose a portion of their crop and still survive and make it work out. Where small-scale farmers, and especially they do a lot of monoculture. They're growing one crop, and a disease or an environmental event can come through and wipe that out, and then there's no rebound, nothing left for them to fall back onto. They have to start over. Whereas larger scale farming, they do have that resiliency built in just because of their physical size. Any event is not going to impact their total crop. It may be portions of it, so they'll have something to harvest and sell. Whereas small scale farming, they just, by definition, they just don't have a lot of resiliency built in because of their limited space and the number of crops they're growing.
Mr. Godwin, can you say what are some of the practices that you may have in place to increase resiliency and mitigate risk as an actual grower yourself? And where would you think there should be additional support for that?
Well, it's a very good question. I know our strategy on the farm when I came back from the city to become a farmer again, we started with a 20-acre orchard. And we've developed and added other orchards. And I like to say we put the farm back together because we live in a narrow valley and it was owned by lots of different people. And we, as neighbors retired and left, we've been able to add stuff back together to reach critical mass. There is advantage to growing multiple crops, and that's why we grow apples, pears, and cherries. It's not an accident. It's to mitigate the risk because all crops cycle differently, and that gives you some benefit. It also is important because it lets you start to spread some of your cost, whether it's equipment or, computer systems and networks and monitoring that's available now with technology. It helps you to afford access to some of that technology because as you grow, you have a broader base to spread that cost on. But at the end of the day, what I see is that getting larger means it takes more investment, it takes more time, and it's a lot more work. And so, yes, you get some risk, but there's always problems. So you think, well, I'm going to mitigate risk by having 3 crops. That means I should do really well on the good years. In 19 years now of farming, there's always something somewhere that takes a hit.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At this time, I would ask my colleague, Mr. Baird of Indiana, for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we really appreciate you and the Ranking Member Dunn for holding today's hearing. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. As a member of this subcommittee and as well as the House Space Science and Technology Committee, I care deeply about the leadership that we have, the U.S. leadership, in research and technology, and I'm grateful we're discussing what our farmers need to address the challenges we have heard about here today. It's estimated that by 2050, we will have a need to feed an additional 2 billion people, and I think we can agree that we want to do that and meet that challenge in a way that's good for our environment and is sustainable by our farmers. So my question comes down to the issue that I believe the United States must be a leader in agricultural technology, including biotechnology, both to keep our environment healthy as well as to feed our families, but also for our economic and national security. So my question is, are we at risk of falling behind other countries in terms of agricultural research and technology related to resiliency? And if you feel that's true, are there any areas that we should be focusing our energy and research on? And I think Dr. Gutmüller, I think we'll start with you. I've only got 5 minutes, so we'll see how far you go with that.
I'll try not to go too far.
Okay.
There's no doubt in my mind, and I speak from personal experience. I've had a long-term relationship with one of the most important research universities in the area of citrus in China for nearly 30 years. And 20 years ago, it was very common for my colleagues to send graduate students and postdocs to my lab to work together with us so we could accomplish things together, but more importantly for them to learn the technology that we have. I was invited to the 120th anniversary of this university just last year, and to see the effort and the number of people and the resources that are devoted to citrus breeding and genetics in that university, which went from very primitive to where it is today, is astounding. We look at it and we say, how can we possibly compete with this? Not only in putting out academic papers, but in getting real-world results. So I've definitely seen in my lifetime, in the short period that I've worked, a real change in what the level of support is in other countries. And that's my crop, that's my business, my world, and it's probably the same, I would bet, in many other commodity research areas.
Thank you. Do any of the other witnesses care to say or make a comment?
Yes, I'd like to mention that the land-grant university system in the United States is the envy of the world for agricultural research and community outreach. And it's a model that other countries look at with envy and try and develop in their own countries. So we've been the benefactors of that since 1862 when it was first started at the land-grant universities. And there are non-land-grant universities in the country as well conducting a lot of good agriculture research. But the partnership between the federal government and the local governments in the land-grant system to enhance research, community outreach, training the next generation of scientists to bring efforts forward to solve our problems and address issues such as sustainability and climate change, I think are some of the best we can see around the world. And people come to us for information, faculty, students, and modeling the program after the land-grant system. I think that's really a lot of us in this room have benefited from that over the years. I know I have personally. I've come up through my graduate and professional careers in a land-grant system, and it's been a great benefit.
Anyone else?
From a farm perspective, the two things that I worry about is the soil, rhizosphere ecology, and improving that understanding of what's happening under the ground, and then the genetics and genomics and plant breeding. I think those are clearly two areas that we need more activities.
Well, I would just add, I just recently had a whole contingent of researchers from the Chinese Academy of Ag Science coming to Cornell to hear about what we're doing on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation here, and also soil ecology and soil biology. On the other hand, I've also been there with exchanges, and they have, as was mentioned earlier, amazing advances from 20, 30 years ago. Very sophisticated field research equipment and technology and all of that. I think our outreach system is still excellent here, and I think we have a lot going for us.
Thank you. I'm out of time, but what I did appreciate, Dr. Godfrey, you mentioning the land-grant universities, because Purdue University is in my district, so thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'll call on my colleague, Mr. Brindisi of upstate New York.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for calling on me. Thank you to all of our witnesses who are here today, especially Dr. Wolfe. Thank you for being here representing Cornell University, a very important institution to upstate New York and to farmers across my congressional district. This question really is for all of our witnesses, whoever wants to take a crack at it. But reports indicate that as USDA considers moving research out of the Washington, D.C. area, economic research service employees working on politically sensitive topics are being asked to relocate in high numbers, meaning there is a good chance they might leave the agency and decide to take their talents elsewhere. I'm concerned that important topics like impacts of climate change won't be fully understood and recognized if we don't have skilled staff within these agencies doing this work. Are you concerned that research on topics like climate change will be negatively impacted by this proposal?
Well, I might take a first crack at that. And I mean, it's been a fantastic partnership for all of my career working with various USDA agencies, and they've also funded much of the work in soil health and also climate change, from the SARE program to NEFA and Hatch funding, et cetera. And my partners there are, we just work hand in hand, and so important to us. And I really appreciate, talking to them, because they also understand what's coming from the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and because they're right here in Washington. And it's really useful to know what's happening in terms of policies and actually keeping us informed about that. I think if they were disengaged from the Washington, D.C. area, that avenue of information for myself, I would miss that. And so, understanding better the initiatives that might be coming down through the USDA and the department. Also, I like the Washington, D.C. area is kind of a neutral ground in terms of commodities, and I think if people were to dissipate, we might focus much more on the Midwest. I like the idea of keeping a USDA that's really got a very broad view of important commodities, and I think it's being in D.C. helps that.
Thank you. Any of the other witnesses? Yes.
I'd just like to share that one of the challenges we've seen, particularly in the organic sector, is the need for research findings and trends about best practices to be well distilled and communicated to other federal agencies, particularly looking at how the USDA's NRCS and risk management understand the best practices in organic systems, and those have been challenging areas, and I think there's been a lot of progress, but there's still more to do. Speaking from personal experience, I can say I've been invited over the years to go present and help facilitate information sharing across USDA agencies, where we invite staff from various arms of the USDA to come sit together and talk and share what's happening on organic within their arms. And while USDA has, I think, always done a good job of inviting folks who were not based in DC to call in and listen, I think it was much more challenging for those USDA staff to hear, to engage in those conversations, while those who are in the room from RMA, NRCS, NIFA arms, et cetera, were able to, I think, more easily share information. So we're a little bit nervous that that ability would be lost.
I'd like to add the convenience of having the NIFA offices here in Washington, D.C. makes interacting with them much more affordable from an economic standpoint and accessibility to the people. In fact, I have an appointment this afternoon with some folks at NIFA to discuss some of the issues for the Virgin Islands. So having them in this central location where we can combine efforts during a visit such as this subcommittee meeting with NIFA, meeting with other colleagues and partners that we have, makes it much more practical, and that partnership can be strengthened if we can meet in one location instead of having it distributed, through different locations, with some of the NIFA people remaining here and some at a new proposed location. It just makes sense to have them all in one spot for us, and interacting with other government agencies as well. And from the Virgin Islands, it's relatively easy to get here from the Virgin Islands, but colleagues across the country, there's time and travel efforts that are involved in getting here. So you want to get the most bang for your buck.
Thank you. All right. Madam Chair, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you. Doctor, it is not easy to get here from the Virgin Islands. I'm trying to convince everyone of all the hardship I have to go through traveling back and forth through the Miami airport, no less.
Sorry, I blew your cover.
Yes. Getting there makes it worthwhile. At this time, I'll call on my colleague, Mr. Thompson, for your questioning.
Chairwoman, thank you very much. Ranking member, thank you for having this hearing, and thank you for each of the panel that are here. Greatly appreciated. We know that it has, quite frankly, always been challenging times for those who grow our food, and for many different reasons, but especially with climate. It's the history of it. It's the nature of agriculture. In fact, the form of our current federal agriculture policy, Farm Bill, was a direct result of the climate disruption that we know as the Dust Bowl. We know that the Irish potato famines, where normally those potatoes do really well in kind of a cooler, maybe a little bit moist environment, and when it gets to extremes, which it did several times in history, resulting in 1 million deaths. When the temperature and the moisture got to an extreme level with the mold, water mold that resulted in those famines. Statuary Hall, Iowa honors Dr. Norman Borlaug, who was credited with saving 1 billion lives. I think most of us have figured out the math. It's probably closer to 2 billion lives today. By using science to adapt to the impact of changing climates. Agriculture is science and technology based on necessity, and it always has been. And yet we need more funding for USDA research. This committee has done, I think, a good job, at least the past 2 farm bills I've been involved with, at supporting USDA, but we need the rest of Congress outside this committee to recognize the importance of making that investment. When I look and compare what we fund the National Institute of Health, and there's no criticism there, but quite frankly, what they get this much and the USDA gets this much, and there's nothing more fundamental to health than good nutrition. It's what we take in, what we consume, and so part of what I'd like to see is a better bridging, a more collaboration with the folks at NIH that have been blessed with increased funding every year with the folks with USDA. Dr. Wolfe, can you speak more on the importance of the role of cover crops in promoting healthy soils? I was proud to lead the first congressional hearing we ever did on healthy soils a couple years back here. And also, has healthy soils how does healthy soils facilitate the retention of moisture within the soil, which is really important, obviously, for folks impacting by drier climates?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yeah, cover crops are one of the core methods of really rebuilding our soils, many of which have over time had organic matter depletion. And almost every farmer I talk to today is very interested in rebuilding that organic matter, rebuilding the health of their soils so that they're not passing on to the next generation soils that are not as good as they inherited from their parents. Cover crops are out there. In addition to your cash crop, you have fall, winter cover crops. You have more vegetation out there sucking up CO2 from the atmosphere, which is the greenhouse gas, and putting it into the soil as organic matter. And it's just one of the key key building strategies. It also, although building the organic matter can take some time, but even in the first year of use of cover crops, if it's a year where we have heavy rainfall events, farmers see immediate benefits in terms of reduction of soil erosion, which is a huge devastating consequence for farmers from heavy rain. So it's one of the main strategies. Also, directly adding organic matter like manures, and then also reducing tillage, which can also lead to loss of organic matter. So all of those are key strategies. And what's fascinating about this soil health thing right now is all farmers are talking about it, organic as well as conventional. There's really a bit of a revolution going on. Even I see this worldwide. I do some work in East Africa there too, rebuilding soils. And it has this advantage for coping with climate change, as well as providing better nutrition for crops, reducing other inputs, and also, by the way, storing carbon in soil, playing a role in mitigation. So very important strategy.
Very good. Pennsylvania, and I assume New York, based on some of your research you've been involved in, the anatomy of a wet year, we're not really getting so much warmer as wetter. Yeah. Lots of rainfall. Any specific mitigation actions that you would recommend for farmers in our area, given sort of the pattern that we're in for the time being?
Yeah, well, relevant to your previous question too, building healthy soils also affects the structure of the soil such that it drains better as well as holding water better. So buffers from both drought and flooding. So that's one strategy that's kind of builds some resilience. But still, if you have very heavy rainfall events, there's different strategies for drainage and all of that. Also thinking about different timing of operations so that we don't have impacts on water quality. So there's a whole range of strategies for dealing with that. And when I talk to farmers about wet years versus dry years, they say a dry year comes and goes. I might lose something that year, but a really wet year, if I lose a lot of my soil, that's going to take a generation to replace. So they're really concerned about that. And we have seen more of that than, 30 years ago, we thought mostly about drought when we thought about climate change. And we're actually seeing that too much water is as big or bigger problem than too little at this point in time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this time, the gentlewoman from Maine, Ms. Pingree, for your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to you and the ranking member for having this hearing, and certainly to the panelists for being here. I really appreciated all of your remarks and testimony. I have so many questions, but I'm just going to keep it to a few. So, Ms. Bryce, thank you so much for the work you do. I know you know that I'm very supportive of organic farming and organic research, and it's really a vital role that you play. I am also a certified organic farmer, so I'm well aware of these challenges. But I think one thing I just wanted to mention is that sometimes we think about organics as sort of this mysterious thing that happens with, different kind of inputs and outputs, but basically the fundamentals are around soil health. So this is an important moment in time because, as we've been talking about, there's so much focus now on soil health, and we have a lot to learn and a lot of sharing that should and could go on. Mr. Godwin, I wanted to mention to you that I also sit on agricultural appropriations, and we've been working very hard on that specialty grant match that you talked about. So we are hoping that we can get some language in the bill. It doesn't help anybody, if we get these bills passed by the end of September, but it's really important that you brought that up and for people to know it. And I think it's also important for the entire committee to understand the issue you raised around ARS. There's no hiring freeze at the Department of Agriculture, but not a lot of positions are being filled right now. And I think this committee should be particularly concerned, as we should all, about the importance of those people to do the work. And you made that really clear. Dr. Wolfe, you have got a wonderful career here in researching soil health and many of the things that we're so focused on, and that farmers are anxious to participate in more. And I know you were a little bit involved in some of the work that was going on in the New York Soil Health Program. Mm-hmm. We have a lot to learn from individual states. I'm particularly interested in how farmers can participate in carbon markets. I see it as, of course, an important tool. It's good for the farmers, and then it's also good if there's a potential for another source of income. And some of that was talked about in New York. I don't think it's moved forward, but in terms of looking to the states right now for what's going on, can you tell us just quickly about that? And I'm particularly interested in how we're going to measure what kind of metrics we're going to use so that we can understand how much carbon is being sequestered in the soil so that farmers can be paid fairly for what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a complicated area and something we in New York, we've had a long history actually of farmers, pioneer farmers working in that area of soil health on their own, and then also working with Cornell and other agencies to do the appropriate research to back them up and move forward, and then also getting a lot of good input from our organic farmers who've been at that for a long time. Yeah, and with the interest and the recognition now that soil health is not just something that farmers are motivated about from the standpoint of building resilience and reducing inputs, but also can be part of the solution in terms of slowing the pace of climate change, a lot of work is turning that way and looking at that. We actually have a project right now where we're trying to get some baseline data on soil carbon in our soils and that sort of thing. We have one district of New York, an assembly person in New York State who's got funding for a pilot project trying to look at ways we might compensate or incentivize farmers to adopt soil health, in part for the benefits of this ecosystem service of storing carbon. It's tricky. I actually had a USDA NEFA funded project on, and part of that was to look at low-cost approaches to monitoring. One thing we have a graduate student who's still finishing up, even though the funding's ran out from that, worked on infrared spectroscopy, for example. You can have on-the-go tractor mounted spectrophotometers that can give you meter by meter estimates of the carbon in the soil. But even with those lower cost approaches, I do think monitoring farm by farm changes in carbon, it's, the error bars around those measurements and the time it takes for that to happen. My personal opinion on approaches to this are focusing more on the practices that we know will build carbon in soils, getting some baseline data on carbon in a region or for a farm, then having a plan at different farms or for a region of how we're going to increase the acreage of farmers adopting practices, cover cropping, reducing tillage, using more organic amendments to get there, and tracking that acreage and periodically, perhaps every 3 to 5 years, maybe actually going in and seeing what progress this has made in terms of carbon. There's also ways of discounting the incentives you might provide in case farmers, for example, for whatever reason, they decided to till the heck out of their soil and all of a sudden the carbon is lost. You can discount the initial benefits, but I think more creating incentives and educational information to get farmers moving in the right direction with practices.
Great. Well, I'm out of time, but thank you very much for that. And you certainly have hit on the key question is whether we're going to measure outputs or practices. And the sooner we can figure that out, the sooner the farmers can start benefiting from the markets that are going to continue to grow. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you holding this hearing. Appreciate you all being here. And as the debate on climate change goes on, and up here in Congress, how we can't solve like border security and things like that. I'm going through the Old Testament right now, and I noticed there was drought, disease, famine, and pestilence. And what I have noticed is human nature has adapted, and that's what you guys do in biotech, especially in the agricultural sector, is we adapt. We make better strains like Dr. Borlaug did that were drought resistant, that could be more heat tolerant. As we move forward in the science of all this, do you believe that the use of biotechnology in agriculture, it's pretty a rhetorical question, will increase or decrease over the next 10 years? It'll increase, right? I mean,
Let's hope, yes, we need it more than ever.
I'm going to have to talk to my question writer. Moving on, as we use biotech, and especially with Florida citrus and Dr. Gmitter, you're doing fabulous work on that. We know some of the technologies to solve that problem, and it's so critical for an iconic crop for Florida, because Florida without oranges is like Wall without Mart. They kind of go hand in hand, or Bud without Weiser. So it's imperative that we get a cure for this, and one of the things will probably be a GMO or CRISPR gene technology. Is that true?
It's very likely that that's going to be one of the things that's going to contribute to the solution, and a major contributor to that solution. It's interesting to hear the discussion about soil health and cover crops, and one thing that we see in Florida, which is basically a beach, very sandy soils with minimal organic matter. One of the things that's happening in the meantime while we're waiting for long-term solutions is our citrus growers have paid an enormous amount of new attention toward soil health. I know so many citrus farmers who are putting out compost, who are growing cover crops. And so all of this it's a complicated disease. It's going to take a complicated set of steps to put this all together. But clearly, a genome-edited solution is going to be a big part of that problem.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, because what we've seen in the past, and you're probably real aware of the GMO for the papaya ring virus, spot ring virus, that the University of Florida worked on. They found a GMO that was tolerant of that virus, yet it took 12, 15 years to take that research to market. The regulatory environment, how much does that impede incentivization for development and research, but then to move a product from finding a cure to market? What needs to change in your realm, with the work that you guys have done?
I think we really need to look at this on a scientific basis, on what is the science. There's an awful lot of negativity about GMOs, and I can understand some of that. What we're talking about with the newer breeding technologies, however, gene editing, we can accomplish things that would occur naturally, spontaneously in nature. And it can be done in such a way, because we've learned some new tricks, in such a way that there's no footprint, no thumbprint, no fingerprint left behind. It's just a change in the DNA, the natural DNA of the plant.
Natural
There's nothing
selection,
that's
right.
brought in from an outside organism. There's no jellyfish, there's no bee. It's citrus DNA. And so this is, holds huge promise for us.
Well, I hope you guys are involved in that process when it comes to the GMOs and the internet, because we know the 100 Nobel laureate scientists said there were no negative consequences of the GMO. We need your voice out there educating the public of what a GMO or CRISPR gene technology is or isn't. I want to move on to something that, I said on Foreign Affairs too. What safeguards do we have in place to land grants or all of our universities to protect intellectual property? And I bring this up because we had one of our professors at the University of Florida was going on a sabbatical to China. And I said, "What are you working on?" He goes, "Well, I'm taking the research I've been working on over there." And I'm like, "No, you don't. That's our intellectual property." And if you guys, I've got 15 seconds if somebody wants to chime in on that.
I can hit that very quickly. Every variety that's released from the University of Florida plant breeding programs is protected by plant patents, and it's protected abroad by plant breeders' rights. And as we find partners internationally to license things, we work with them. It's important to have an international partner involved with this, because if we don't have a partner in a foreign country, you know what? Citrus trees fly anyway.
Right.
And the technology goes away. So it's important that we have a recognition of the importance, the significance of having partners.
I appreciate you all being here. Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Dr. Gamitter, I have a question for you. In your testimony, you talked a little bit also about saline in water and irrigation, and usage of that in terms of rice. In the Virgin Islands, we have huge issues with irrigation and desalinization plants. How is the science working in that, and do you see real support, not just in rice crops and others, but that could be utilized in other areas as well?
Yeah, it's interesting talking about foreign affairs. The paper that was published on this technology came from China.
Mm-hmm.
And
We
found...
took their intellectual property?
I'm sorry?
We took their intellectual property?
I wouldn't say we've done that. No, the information is out there.
Right.
Information is out there, and maybe.
Don't answer.
They found a single gene that modulates the plant's response to salinity.
Mm-hmm.
And by knocking down the expression of this gene, they can water the plants with salty water, and the plants grow normally. They found there were no other changes to any of the other genetics of the plant. And so this is the kind of thing that the scientific community as a whole, we're just beginning to scratch the surface. We have a lot of information and understanding of some of the fundamental biology and underlying genetics. And if we can just simply change a gene in a very minor fashion, we can dramatically change the behavior of the plant. So this thing about salinity in rice, those genes are actually in common in almost all plants. Very similar systems have evolved over, the millions of years that plants have evolved. So there's huge opportunities for that. They're working also on genes that are involved with tolerance of drought stress. There are people now who think that we can grow rice in the same kinds of places where we grow wheat without flooding. And so,
Amazing.
these are large, globally important food crops, and this is the future that's ahead of us if we can find the appropriate way to get there.
Thank you so much. That's very informative. I'm waiting for it to become changing the genetic disposition for the behavior of my four sons, so that, they would have a tolerance to homework.
Let the record show I raised my hands.
Mr. Panetta of California, you're next for your 5 minutes.
Once again, thank you, Madam Chairman, Ranking Member Dunn. And to all the witnesses, thank you for your time for being here today, as well as your preparation in order to be here, and all the work that you have done to become experts in this area, so thank you very much. Obviously, I think everybody in this room would agree that agriculture and people in agriculture are uniquely positioned to contribute to the mitigation efforts when it comes to climate change. And I think that's why it's very, very important, and I think all of us could agree, why farmers, organic, conventional, need to be at the table when we talk about reducing our national greenhouse gas output and our footprint. And so, Ms. Tenser, in your experience, obviously being from the Central Coast of California and understanding the balance and the work that our people in agriculture, be it organic or conventional, have taken, I would say, on the forefront in this area. What's your experience in working with either the organic or the conventional community when it comes down to the steps that those producers are taking to be proactive when it comes to climate change and dealing with the effects of climate change?
Thank you. I think it's exciting to see that farmers of all types are innovators and experimenting on their farms day in and day out with diversity of practices. And I think what we're seeing again and again is that farmers who are implementing a variety of practices are having the most impact on both increasing their ability to adapt as well as to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. We're seeing that reduced tillage coupled with the full suite of organic soil health practices, including crop diversification, cover cropping, organic amendments, and sound nutrient management, can really enhance carbon sequestration and build climate resiliency. We're also seeing incredible innovations between farmers and researchers in how to adapt. I know we recently supported a project at the University of California, Davis, a researcher there, Emily Gowden, who was interested in how to help farmers deal with drought situations and worked with an organic tomato grower. And by changing their soil health practices, increasing their compost rates, and doing a few other soil health related practices, they're able to reduce irrigation requirements by 6 to 12 inches per year without impacting yield or fertility. That's a really exciting innovation on an organic farm with the support of research to directly support growers' ability to adapt to climate change.
Definitely. Mr. Godwin, have you worked with producers that have taken steps to deal with efforts, mitigation efforts when it comes to the effects of climate change? And if so, what types of things are they doing?
Sure. Yes, I have, and we do some on our farm as well as other neighbors and friends. One of the big things that we're doing for soil building is, farmers are simple, ingenious people. We do a lot of mow and blow. So we cut out holes on the side of our mower and we blow the clippings under the tree, as an example. Where we farm organically, we've gotten away from, chemical herbicides and chemicals. So we're trying to grow the cover crops to the tree and finding cover crops that are low growing so they don't interfere with irrigation and tree growth, as an example. And then there's some places where we incorporate biochar and other things to try to again, change the soil biology to get favorable conditions.
Outstanding. And let me ask both of you, what here on this subcommittee and in that building across the way and within our federal government, what can we do to help support those types of efforts and to expand on it? What can happen here?
I think that, you know, the biggest area is making sure we got the smart people helping get the right research. There's snake oil guys that come by every day with new stuff with very little documentation and data. And so the right researchers and the right efforts happening, that's where the extension comes in, and it's so important, because then it helps me make better choices, because there's a lot of people selling a lot of stuff.
Fair enough. Ms. Tenser?
I want to, thank the committee, because I think we did see some real gains in the most recently passed Farm Bill to further the field of research, both in organic specifically, but in climate resiliency and adaptation more generally. And we're really excited about that, and there's still more to do. I would say that one thing is, not looking at certain programs to address the full suite of challenges we face in both climate resiliency, adaptation, and mitigation. One program alone can't fix this all, but it really has to be integrated across various USDA programs. And last but not least, I think we have more work to do as a community, and with your help in ensuring that research results aren't sitting on the shelves of academia, but are translated and usable for producers across the country.
Thank you. I thank the witnesses for their leadership in this area, and I yield back my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Shire of Washington State, your questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have had a lot of my questions already answered, so this is going to be a smattering of little detailed ones. This is what happens when you stay through everything. Okay, so the first is that I see this commitment from all of you, because you are science-based and farmers are smaller farmers, that you're committed to all of this. And yet, just yesterday, I had a conversation with our chairman, Colin Peterson, about this topic, and I got the impression that overall there was a ton of skepticism and feet dragging. So I just wanted to get your perspective. Like, if you look at farming across the country, what is the buy-in? What is the interest? Where's the passion about soil health and doing these things? Is it only organic farmers? Is it only small farmers? Can you give me that sense? And I don't even know where to start. Whoever wants to answer.
I might start. I mean, I've been at this for 30 years, and I do think it's changing as farmers are beginning to see changes on their own farms. So 30 years ago, we had the climate models to talk about looming threats, but now they see so many changes, so they're much more open to that. In fact, there was one of the biggest farmer surveys I'm aware of was done by a colleague, Arbuckle, at University of Iowa, I believe, Iowa State. And over 4,000 corn and soybean growers, and something like 67% said they felt climate change was happening. Not all of those were convinced that humans were the primary cause, but they're all convinced something's changing on their farm, and they're interested in adaptation. And actually another 20-30% are kind of on the fence about it. Only a few percent said we just don't believe in it. So I think the attitudes are changing as they're seeing impacts on their farm. So that's one thing. I think that also, I don't know any farmers who aren't interested in renewable energy and what that might mean for the bottom line for them. And that's kind of relevant to all of this. So you go to Iowa and you see all the farms have their wind turbines out. This has to do with state and federal policies that have helped facilitate this, just like at the individual homeowner level. There has to be a way for them to break into that sort of renewable energy area. So another area that's been kind of positive is a major mitigation strategy for farmers is reducing nitrogen fertilizer use, because it's not just about nitrate in waters, but also nitrous oxide emissions, which all of you would know, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And for example, at Cornell and other places as well, a colleague of mine has developed a phone app called Adaptation, which allows farmers to reduce their nitrogen application levels without risk to yields. It's kind of been demonstrated over and over on farms.
And one of the best ways, my understanding is one of the best ways to do that is to do no-till or low-till farming, so you don't have erosion in the first place. You don't have to keep applying nitrogen. You can have more soil health. I mean, I guess my question is, I think most farmers, probably 100% of farmers, should understand the climate's changing. Are they ready to? I mean, farmers really could save our planet. They, with with soil health and with cover crops and crop rotation, farmers can decrease our greenhouse gas emissions and sequester carbon, take 20% out of our atmosphere.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to know. Where is the interest? Is the interest there? And what can we do? I don't think they want to hear from suburban Schreier here about this, but, you know, farmers learning from farmers, like we heard from Ms. Tenser, having the researchers available and the outreach programs, how do we make that connection happen?
There's still constraints to adaptation and adoption of practices. Like most farmers are really quite convinced that they've seen enough pioneer farmers using soil health practices that are seeing benefits, for example, in a dry year, surviving quite well, whereas they're not. But they have to perhaps have to purchase no-till farm equipment, new types of actual capital investments. There's more management complexity in using cover crops. So there's those kind of real challenges, and this is where I think it's just a matter of time and also farmer-to-farmer training, those who've been successful.
Sounds like this is a place where we could help with helping with financing that. I have a couple questions. I'm running out of time. I had a question for you, Dr. Gmitter, about whether there are perennial weeds, perennial crops. You had talked about not having to till and some genetic engineering. I was wondering if there's anything on the horizon there.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
So perennial crops so that you wouldn't have to plant every year.
Yeah.
Anything on the horizon with genetic engineering?
Well,
there?
citrus is a perennial crop, so
So you were talking in a grander scale, like you were talking about genetic engineering for rice to grow with saline. So this would be about whether there's a
converting
prospect.
annual crops into perennial plants?
Yes.
I'm not personally aware of a whole lot of work going on in that area.
Okay. And then last comment, I only have 10 seconds. If you can get it in, there was some discussion of GMOs, and in my mind, there's a difference between GMOs where you're doing what you're talking about, taking some naturally occurring features and then reproducing them, versus GMOs where you modify an organism to be resistant to a pesticide, for example, and then can cover a crop with a pesticide. I wondered if you could comment about the difference there. It seems like a very overarching term.
Yeah, it's a very simple distinction, actually. In general, the GMOs that we look at are cases where genetic material is taken from other plants or other organisms and moved into the plants that we grow. What we're talking about with gene editing is much different. It's simply doing something, and we have the technology to do it now, doing something with the plant's own natural DNA, which, given an infinite period of time, would happen naturally. But because of the way things are changing, we don't have infinity to wait.
Thank you. Thanks for your work. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. From the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you all for being here today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to discuss the impacts of climate change and our farmers and what they can do to mitigate these risks. Working with our extensions and land-grant universities, it's vital to the success of our producers across the country, and I know I'm very proud, I'm from New Jersey, of Rutgers University, what was Cook College and was the College of Agriculture and Environmental Science, and then now is the College of Biological and Environmental Sciences. And the reason I know is that's where I graduated, but they have done a lot of good work with this as well. And as we continue to deal with the climate change and its impacts, including changing weather conditions and rising sea levels, it's important we continue to meet the needs, obviously, of producers with advancement in research, new technologies, and improved management. So technology matters. The question I have, and I don't mean to go back to this again, because I've really read two different stories about this, and I just want to go back to it a little bit. You know, and I don't want to be China-phobic because I'm not, but they are really becoming a leader in the world in many, many areas and are very competitive with the United States in many areas as well. Excuse me. But do you feel that they are moving ahead at a faster rate, that they are competing more, that they do have the potential? As much as we love our land-grant universities and everything that we do, and I think it's all good, are we in a real competition here? Because there are folks absolutely in the agriculture world, and I've read some of your periodicals, that do believe it's really happening. And any one of you can answer that.
May I, please?
Sure.
There is no question that technologically, the Chinese system is moving much more rapidly than ours is today.
Okay, so that's the answer I wanted. With that being said, candidly, is that because they are to some degree stealing our technology, utilizing our technology, our intellectual property? Is it just because they are investing so much in research and because of the system they have of government, they can control that so much? Which is it?
In my opinion, a big part of it is investment. It's financial, and they're pouring a lot of money into equipment. They are sending their stocks not only to the U.S., but everywhere around the world to try and gather the best information that's available in the world of science. As scientists, we openly communicate, and they're doing a good job at that. One thing that has always been important in my mind where we have an advantage is even though these Chinese researchers, and I'm speaking about citrus now specifically, but it probably is more broad, even though they're racing ahead technologically, there's no connection really between what goes on in the research laboratory and what goes to the field. 20 years ago, I was invited and I gave a talk and we met with some important political guys and they asked us, what can we do to help our citrus farmers in this province? And we said, well, you have excellent researchers here doing really good things, but you don't have any connection between what they're doing to the farmers. And this is an advantage that we have. We talked about the land grant system and the ability to extend this information.
So to make sure I understand, the real advantage we have is, and I'm familiar with it, if I keep my voice here, is that we get our information out to the farmer. That's part of the thing. Farmers have questions. They call the universities. There are people who actually will come out to the farm, help you, work with you, train you, et cetera. So they are learning a great deal of information, but they aren't getting that information to their farmer who is still farming in somewhat of a traditional way?
That's a part of it, but another part of it is you have researchers, and I'm an example of that. I don't have an extension appointment, but I interact with citrus farmers all the time. Nearly 30% of my time goes that way, and it's because I need that information from them for me to structure the research that I do to provide benefits to them. So there's a good two-way communication as opposed to a vacuum between agriculture and research.
So they don't have that two-way street. What are they doing with all this information they're learning?
A lot of it becomes publications, and the researchers are rewarded for publishing in high-level international journals, and there's little recognition or reward, at least in the world of citrus, for any of that getting translated to something that helps agriculture.
So it's really not practical, actually, in their case. It's not a practical application.
Not immediately
of the
practical.
research. Is that true anywhere else? I mean, any other thoughts, please?
I'd just like to share that we hold an annual research forum to bring researchers from all over the country together with organic farmers to discuss both research findings as well as hear needs from the organic farming community. And the events are incredibly successful. Both farmers and researchers are hungry for those opportunities. Last year, our forum was hosted by Rutgers University, which was very satisfying for us. It's not an area that's always been proactively. They actually sought us out and said, the farmers and researchers in this region want to do this, come together and share. And so I just want to say it was very successful. We publish all those findings, but both the farmers and the researchers say they benefited from those exchanges.
Okay.
I would just like to add, I agree with what the others had said. I still think, though, that our universities establish a certain approach to research that's very creative, and I don't think some of these other places like China have really gotten there yet.
So we're not getting blown away?
No, I think there's an issue where my graduate students, by the time they're ready to their PhD's just about done. They know more about their topic than I do, and they're challenging me constantly about it. That sort of challenge between faculty and students is not quite the same in China, I would say. And I think this really breeds a certain level of creativity. It's a subtle nuance maybe, but I think it's significant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn, if you have any closing remarks?
I do not.
Okay. I want to thank our witnesses, and all of my colleagues who are here this afternoon to be with us and to this morning to participate, and what I think has been, for me, extremely informative. I think we've really developed a record here with the kind of work and research that is going on, and its efficacy and importance in resilience and mitigation and what can and should be done in this area for farmers and ranchers, which are facing threats now. Flooding, heat, drought, all of those things are faced by farmers, livestock owners, et cetera, throughout this country. There is real value in investments for public agricultural research. Our farmers need more resources to better mitigate the risks that they face. They are our lifeblood and those that feed us and many people around the world, and we've got to safeguard that resource. This hearing underscored the importance of ensuring that farmers, ranchers, and researchers have a seat at the table in that discussion. I want to thank you all for the information you've provided us, and let the record reflect that under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material, supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research is adjourned.